The northern wind sliced through the narrow streets of Aurora like an invisible blade, slipping into every crack in the bricks, every window long untouched. Snow fell thickly, and the night sky wore a muted gray, silent and endless. Inside a wooden house tucked away at the end of Aspen Street, Lisa Mitchell curled beneath a heavy blanket. The warmth from the fireplace barely covered a small corner of the room. It had been 3 years since the accident that took her husband and their unborn child. Since then, Lisa lived as though time had stopped, each day repeating itself in silence, the wind blowing through her soul like it passed through an abandoned house. Tonight, like so many others, Lisa sat rereading the same half-finished book, her eyes not following the words. Outside, the snow kept falling, thicker by the minute. She no longer noticed the wind, had grown used to it, until a sound, thin as a whisper, drifted from the front door. At first it was just a faint scratching, like a branch brushing the wood. But then it came again, sharper, more rhythmic, like a plea from a place far away, yet strangely near. Lisa stood up. Her bare feet touched the cold floor and she shivered. She stepped slowly toward the front door. The chill seeped through the cracks, making her hands tremble. Peering through the frosted glass, she saw nothing. Only darkness, snow, and the sound, still there, insistent like a faint heartbeat on the other side of the world. She hesitated. Something deep inside told her to turn back. But her heart, though once shattered, still beat with enough strength to recognize when a living being was begging to survive. When Lisa opened the door, the wind rushed in like a lost, starving animal. Snow whipped at her face, but she stood still. Before her, on the porch, now buried under white ice, was a sight that took her voice away. A German shepherd, large but so emaciated that every bone stood out beneath its matted, bloodied fur. Its amber eyes, deep and endless, looked at Lisa not with fear or desperation, but with something far more disarming, unconditional trust. Beneath its belly, pressed into the freezing snow, were 2 tiny newborn pups, eyes still closed, bodies trembling violently from the cold. The mother didn't whimper, didn't bark. She did nothing but shield her puppies with a body that had nearly reached its limit, as if, even if she were to die, the last warmth in her chest might buy her pups a few more seconds of life. Lisa knelt, her hands reaching out instinctively with the reflex of a mother she was never allowed to be. But when her fingers brushed against that wounded back, the dog growled softly, not in anger, but in the wary tone of a soul that had been betrayed too many times. She wouldn't let Lisa touch her, but she didn't leave either. No one knew how many nights the dog had wandered through the snow, how far she had traveled to find a place she believed would be safe. No one knew where she had given birth, under what conditions, or how she had survived with wounds like that. But Lisa knew one thing. She had chosen the right door. Lisa stepped back, not forcing anything. "Come in, Mama," she whispered, voice hoarse with emotion. "If you can't trust me yet, at least let me give your babies a place to breathe." For a moment that stretched as long as a lifetime, the dog looked at her, not with suspicion, but with something profoundly human, careful consideration. Then she stood, trembling, and nudged one of the pups toward Lisa, as if entrusting her with something sacred. Lisa cradled the pup quickly, wrapping it in her arms against the biting cold, and stepped back to make room. The mother followed silently. No sound echoed except the door closing behind them. But Lisa knew. She had just let life walk in, and opened a chapter she never expected to begin. In that biting cold, there was a mother dog and her pups, a woman shattered by grief, and the first flicker of light in a winter that had lasted a lifetime. As the door clicked shut, Lisa Mitchell stood still in the dim light flickering from the fireplace. She wasn't frozen from the cold, but from something stirring inside her, something nameless, formless, something that had returned after years of silence. In the old room, 3 drenched, shivering lives lay curled up on the wooden floor. Lisa quickly spread out a thick towel that still held some of the warmth she had carried in her chest. The mother dog, her body crusted with dried blood, dirt, and melting snow, struggled to stay upright. Her slow steps revealed a gash on her hind leg, long and raw, packed with grime and dried blood. Lisa knelt, her eyes meeting the amber gaze of the dog. In that moment, she no longer saw an animal. She saw a mother, exhausted, ragged, but refusing to collapse, because her babies needed her breath to keep going. She didn't say a word. She simply picked up one of the newborn pups with both hands, so light it felt like holding a cloud, a breath. Its skin was still soft and damp, shivering with every beat. Lisa could feel the faint warmth, the fragile heartbeat in her palms, like he was whispering, "We're not ready to disappear yet." Freya, that name had not yet been spoken aloud, but in Lisa's heart it was already chosen, moved slightly. She didn't growl, didn't block Lisa. Instead, she nudged her remaining pup closer to the towel, then curled her body protectively around both of them. Her ears drooped, her body trembled, but her eyes did not. Those eyes lifted toward Lisa, steady and calm in a way that made her feel small. When Lisa gently pulled a thin blanket over Freya's back, the dog twitched but didn't pull away. A sigh escaped Lisa's chest, long, deep, like the surrender of a soul that had fought too long. No words were spoken. None were needed. In a space filled only with the crackling of firewood and the wind outside, a pact was made on the most primal trust. "I won't hurt you, and you trust me enough to bring your most precious things here." Lisa didn't leave. She sat beside them, her hand resting near the twitching little tail that flicked now and then in broken sleep. She could feel their breath, warm, tiny, sometimes skipping beats, as if life itself was still learning how to exist in this cold world. A long time passed. When the flames in the fireplace began to glow bright orange, lighting the room like the first dawn, Lisa realized something she hadn't done in 3 years. She gave someone a name with all her heart. "Freya," she whispered, her finger brushing gently against the mother dog's head, where sparse fur revealed pale, tired skin. "I don't know why you came here, but if you're a warrior goddess, then maybe I was lucky that you knocked on my door." Freya's ears twitched. Lisa didn't expect a response, but when the dog looked up at her, the fear and wariness were gone. There was only peace. Fragile, faint, but peace nonetheless. The first Lisa had felt since the accident stole her family. Maybe, at that moment, 2 mothers, one who had been and one who was becoming, understood each other without a single word. That night, for the first time in years, the house was no longer a hiding place from the past. It became a home. Not perfect, not glowing, not filled with laughter, but alive. 3 wet little beings slept soundly. A woman no longer felt like she was just surviving. And something, small but real, began flowing back into Lisa's heart. Something like hope, like a new flame, kindling quietly in the white winter. The blurred light of a winter morning filtered through the misted window, brushing across the faded wooden floor, reaching the spot where Freya curled herself protectively around her 2 pups. The fireplace still glowed, its crackling embers scattering small sparks like gentle whispers inside a home long accustomed to silence. Lisa Mitchell sat against the leg of an old armchair, holding a mug of ginger tea long since gone cold. Her gaze stayed on Freya, the creature who, just hours ago, had been a stranger knocking at her door in a blizzard, now resting as if she'd always belonged there. Beneath the thick blanket, the 2 pups stirred occasionally, still searching for their mother's faint milk. One of them let out a small sneeze, its nose dusted with straw and snow, a sound that made Lisa smile for the first time in what felt like forever. Then came a knock at the door. Not loud or assertive, just a quiet, hesitant tap, like the visitor didn't want to disturb the fragile peace within. Lisa opened the door. Standing there was Liam Carter, the delivery man who showed up in this area a few times each month. In his arms, a large paper bag from the Pet and Paw shop near Main Street. His beanie sat askew, his orange scarf dusted with snow, and his cheeks were flushed from the cold. "Sorry if I'm intruding," he said sincerely, breath forming a soft cloud. "I saw them last night as I passed by. I wasn't sure whether to stop, but this morning I couldn't shake the thought of them." Lisa stepped aside, opening the door wider. No hesitation. She didn't know why she trusted him. Maybe it was his eyes. The eyes of someone who had known pain but hadn't let it harden him. Or maybe it was the way he held the bag, carefully, like something more than supplies was inside. Something fragile. Something sacred. He stepped in. When he saw Freya, something shifted in his expression. Not fear. Respect. He nodded slightly, as if greeting a battle-worn general. Freya didn't growl. She remained alert, but made no aggressive move. She looked straight at Liam, her gaze steady, firm, but not threatening. In that room, a quiet understanding passed between species who'd never met before. "I brought some formula for the pups," Liam said, gently unpacking the items. Milk replacement, tiny bottles, liquid food, a few packs of soft cloths, thermal pads for newborn puppies, and a pale blue fleece blanket. Also a battery-powered heating pad. I don't know if they'll take to it, but maybe it'll help. Lisa watched each item emerge, as if witnessing a miracle bloom from pure kindness. She wasn't used to receiving compassion. After her loss, she had trained herself to rely on no one. But looking at those simple items, a part of her softened, like ancient ice beginning to crack. "You didn't have to do this," she murmured. "I know," Liam replied with a small smile. "But I wanted to. I think they need someone else to believe they deserve to live." Lisa said nothing more. She walked over and gently picked up one of the sleeping pups. "I named this one Scout," she whispered, "and the other is Maple. They deserve names." Liam nodded. Beautiful names, strong and gentle. He looked at Freya for a long time. She brought them here through a snowstorm, with wounds like that. There's only one reason any creature would risk that much. Love. At that moment, Freya stirred. Her ears shifted slightly, as if she understood. She lifted her head, not in alarm, but to look at Lisa, a look filled with the first glimmer of trust. Lisa bent down, gently stroking Freya's back. "Her name is Freya," she said softly, voice thick with feeling. "I don't know why I chose it. It came to me like a voice from far away." Liam smiled. "Freya, the goddess of survival and protection? Sounds like destiny." He didn't stay long. Before leaving, he pulled a small piece of paper from his coat pocket and handed it to Lisa. "My number. If you need anything, food, or just someone to talk to, call me. I don't mind." She took it, nodding slightly. "Thank you for coming back." Standing on the porch as the snow resumed its gentle fall, Liam looked inside one last time, at the flickering firelight, at 3 tiny lives nestled together in new warmth. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the snow as quietly as he had arrived, leaving nothing behind but so much. Inside Lisa, something stirred. Not clear, not overwhelming, but certain. Maybe from the moment Liam Carter stepped inside, the world wasn't just her and the past anymore. Maybe this winter would be different. The door clicked shut behind Liam Carter, leaving a faint halo of warmth on the cold glass pane. The snow was falling softer now, but the wind still whistled through cracks in the old walls, echoing like a broken tune from somewhere distant and old. Inside the house, firelight cast shadows of 3 small creatures, where new life was still clinging on in the long winter. Lisa Mitchell stood silently for a long while, gently clutching the paper with Liam's number. She placed it on the table, next to the cold tea and the half-folded blanket. She didn't fully understand why Liam's presence made her feel more at ease, but she didn't need to. Someone had come, expecting nothing in return, simply to offer kindness. That was rare, something she'd forgotten how to be grateful for. When she turned back, her eyes found Freya. The mother dog lay curled around her 2 pups, but she wasn't asleep. Her ears stood tall, and her amber eyes sparked with alertness, not at Lisa, but at the open space left behind by the door to the outside world. Lisa moved closer and sat beside her as usual, but this time she didn't reach out immediately. She just sat there, back leaning against the chair, body tilted toward the blanket nest, watching Freya's every movement, from the way her ears flicked at unfamiliar sounds to how she flinched when the fire cracked too loudly. Freya hadn't left. Though nothing bound her, no leash, no locked doors, she stayed, as if knowing this was the only place left where she could breathe without paying a price. But even in staying, Freya hadn't let down her guard. With Lisa, she had slowly learned to coexist. She allowed herself to sleep when Lisa was near. She let Lisa touch Scout and Maple, to clean them with warm cloths, to feed them from the tiny bottles. But whenever anyone else approached, whether it was Liam's friendly voice, the neighbor's knock, or even footsteps outside the window, Freya growled, a low, steady sound that sent chills down your spine. It wasn't territorial. It was the growl of something that had been caged too long, hurt too often, pushed into survival mode not out of instinct, but by orders shouted in the dark. Lisa began to notice patterns. Loud noises made Freya jump. Strangers staring through windows made her stand guard, ears low, tail tucked, not barking, just watching, like she was facing ghosts only she could see. One night, when everything seemed calm, Freya shot up. No loud noise, no clear reason. She turned toward the window, stood watchful. She didn't sleep that night, only kept watch. And Lisa understood then. The thing that frightened Freya wasn't out there anymore. It lived inside her, in memories, in scars healed on the surface but still aching deep down. Maybe it was the echo of boots on metal floors, the clink of a gate slamming shut, the smell of old sweat from someone who barked orders in the dark. One morning, Lisa carefully placed a hand on Freya's back as she licked Maple's fur. For a moment, Freya froze. Her whole body tensed. Then a low, soft growl escaped her throat. Not to threaten, just the reflex of something touched too often only to be hurt, dragged, or forced. Lisa didn't pull back, but she didn't push either. She simply whispered, "You're safe now, Freya. No one here will hurt you." She didn't know if Freya understood human words, but the dog turned her head, and in her eyes, the fear had faded. Something else remained, like an old wound recognizing the hand that wouldn't reopen it. Like a being who finally sensed someone wanted to protect her, asking for nothing in return. Freya lay back down, not pressed against Lisa, but closer than ever before. Scout and Maple rested their heads on her legs, curling up under the soft blanket, drifting off to the steady sound of breathing. And in that moment, Lisa understood. Freya didn't need pity. She needed respect, she needed to be heard, and she needed to exist beside someone, not beneath them. That afternoon, when Liam returned with food and a tiny red collar for Maple, Freya didn't come forward, but for the first time, she didn't growl. Since that afternoon when Freya lay still by Lisa's feet without a growl, a new kind of air began to seep into the house. No one said it aloud, but everyone felt it. Something had shifted. Not because the past had been erased, but because, for the first time, Freya had allowed safety to find her without closing herself off. Lisa began searching for someone who could truly help the little family. Not just the kindness of passers-by, but real expertise. She remembered a mobile vet clinic mentioned at last summer's market. They said the doctor had a calm voice, serious eyes warmed by empathy, and hands gentle enough to hold a heart clenched in fear. Her name was Dr. Sarah Patel. The next morning, at exactly 9:50 a.m., a faded teal van parked at the gate. The door opened, and a tall, slightly thin woman stepped out, a gray scarf wrapped around her neck and a coat dusted in snow. Salt and pepper hair was tucked neatly under a thick beanie, and her glasses slipped slightly down the bridge of her nose, revealing eyes that held quiet stories of things once lost. When Lisa opened the door, Sarah gave a nod. No small talk. She didn't carry bulky medical gear, just a worn but well-kept canvas satchel slung across her shoulder. "You're Lisa." "Yes, thank you for coming." "Where are Freya and the pups?" "By the fireplace. I've kept them warm since yesterday." Sarah didn't step in right away. She stood on the threshold, eyes scanning the room. Not judging, just understanding, in the way only someone who's patched up broken things before can understand. When she entered, her gaze went straight to Freya. The mother dog remained still, eyes on the stranger, but neither barking nor reacting sharply. Her body tensed for a moment as Sarah approached, but relaxed when Lisa placed a soft hand on her back. Sarah didn't touch her immediately. She crouched down, knees folded, eyes level with Freya's. "Hello, love," she said, voice low and steady. "I'm not here to take anything, just to see what you've been through." She opened her bag, pulling out antiseptic wipes, ointment for cracked skin, and a small oral rehydration dropper. Everything was compact, simple, like her hands, precise, efficient, without a wasted motion. When Sarah touched Freya's paw, the dog flinched, but she didn't growl this time. Sarah checked each claw, the cracked and worn paw pads from cold and exhaustion. The skin on her belly was rough and discolored, rubbed raw over time. But when Sarah gently reached her left side, Lisa noticed her hand pause. She didn't speak, just parted the coarse fur. A scar, thin as thread, coldly precise. Not a scratch or collision mark. It was surgical, clean, professional. Sarah leaned in. On the scar, just beneath the skin, was a small, grain-sized bump. Firm. Unnatural. Like an implant. Her eyes darkened, though her expression remained unchanged. No shock, just a heavy quiet, like something long suspected had now been confirmed. She brushed over the area once more, then gently covered Freya with a blanket. Lisa saw the shift. "Something's not right, is it?" Sarah looked up, eyes thoughtful. "I'm not sure yet, but she's been through something out of the ordinary. That scar, it wasn't from an accident. It might have been from an implant. Possibly more." Then she lowered her voice, fingers resting softly on the sleeping scout. "I've seen this kind of scar before. At old K9 training stations, the sort of procedures that never made it into records." Before leaving, Sarah handed Lisa a small packet of medicine, a few nutrient vials, and some instructions. "Don't force her to eat. Let her choose. But always keep food close. And if anything unusual happens, barking without cause, panic at sirens or heavy footsteps, call me right away." She returned to Freya's side, bent low, and placed her hand gently over the dog's chest. "You kept your babies alive because you never let yourself fall. But now, you don't have to fight alone anymore." The door closed behind her. The little van rolled back into the snow-covered street. Lisa stood by the window, watching it disappear behind a line of bare trees. Inside her, something stirred, like snow quietly melting under the eaves. This wasn't over. There were stories behind Freya's eyes, stories no one had told. And now, Lisa couldn't turn away. Even after Dr. Sarah Patel's van had vanished beyond the withered trees at the end of the street, Lisa Mitchell stood motionless at the window, her fingers resting unconsciously on the thin curtain fluttering in the draft. Sarah's words echoed in her mind. About the scar on Freya's side, about the signs of a past that never made it into any file. But beneath the concern, something deeper stirred. Like she too had been examined, not with tools, but with a gaze that reached the very core of who she was. The afternoon faded in silence. Freya still lay near the fireplace, her head nestled beside her pups. Maple whimpered in her dreams, and Scout kicked into the air, running in some half-born dream. Lisa approached, sitting beside them. Her hand gently stroked Freya's thin back, for the first time, met without tension or retreat. The mother dog opened her eyes briefly, looked at Lisa, then closed them again. Not full trust, but no longer guarded. And in that moment, Something stirred in Lisa. A thought, hazy at first, but growing clearer, like a familiar tune returning from somewhere long denied. The room at the end of the hallway. The room that had remained untouched, locked, not because she lacked the courage to open it, but because she feared unleashing a grief still alive inside it. But now, this house held 3 fragile lives that needed a place to start over. And she knew. It was time to open the door. Her hand touched the brass doorknob, dulled with age. It was colder than she remembered. The hinges creaked softly as she turned the key. Small sounds, yet enough to stir every memory. She pushed the door open, and a faint scent of lavender floated out. The wax she had once placed by the window, untouched since that fateful day. The room was unchanged. The pale blue walls she and her husband had argued over for 3 hours at the paint store. The oak crib still stood, a faded paper star mobile hanging above it. On the rocking chair, a tiny beige wool hat lay neatly folded beside a storybook she had once inscribed by hand. "For you, little one." Lisa stood still. She didn't cry. She just breathed, slow and deep, as if reminding herself she was no longer the shattered woman who walked out of the hospital that day. No longer a ghost drifting through endless winters in this house. She was someone who had opened the door. And after all these years, that was the bravest thing she had ever done. It took hours to clean the room, not because it was messy, but because each item echoed. She folded each blanket and placed them in the old wooden chest. She took down the star mobile gently, as if dreams still hung from its strings. Every time she paused, Scout or Maple would let out a small sound, as if reminding her the present was still here, still waiting to be filled with light. By dusk, the room had changed. No longer a place of remembrance, but of breath, rebirth, for the little ones, and for her too. Lisa laid a thick rug by the window, spread soft blankets along the wall, arranged the clean towels in neat stacks. She placed the medical kit Sarah had left on the bookshelf. Next to it, 3 bowls, one for Freya, 2 smaller ones for her pups. She knelt, whispering like a promise. This will be your home. Not a cage, not a cold floor, but a true home. A place where you can breathe, live, and be safe. Then she returned, lifting Maple first, then Scout, and placed them on the soft blanket. Freya followed without being called. She walked slowly, as if she'd seen this room before in a memory older than memory. She sniffed around, then lay down, curling herself protectively around her pups. Lisa sat on the floor, leaning against the wall. She said nothing more, but her eyes followed Freya's every movement, each tiny tail flick from Maple, each sleepy murmur from Scout, soaking in the truth. This was no longer the locked room. This was a room alive again. She placed a hand on Freya's head, gently stroking. "Thank you for staying." And perhaps, on some level, Freya understood. She looked up, her eyes no longer wary, but calm, like a lake after the storm. Scout nestled into her belly. Maple let out a soft snort, like a laugh in a dream. And Lisa knew, though the past had buried her in darkness, here, in the room that once symbolized loss, 3 tiny hearts were teaching her how to love again. Evening crept slowly over the snow-covered street as the final light of day streamed through the window of the room that had now become a new home. Freya curled protectively around her 2 pups, a fragile, enduring ark of shelter. Lisa Mitchell hadn't left the room, not because of fear, but because she no longer felt that old dread that used to tighten her chest every time she passed the door. Instead, a strange stillness settled around her, like time itself had paused so she could listen to her heart beating again, for something truly alive. Maple and Scout slept soundly, their soft, rhythmic breathing blended with the quiet crackle of the fireplace, forming a gentle sound, a lullaby for someone who had known too much loss. Lisa sat at the edge of the mattress, gently stroking Freya's back. For the first time, she tried brushing out the dirt-matted fur from the long days Freya had spent in the cold. Her fingers moved through the tangles with care, as if touching a living memory. But when she reached the left side, where Dr. Sarah had once brushed over, Lisa paused. Beneath the thin skin was a small, hard lump, just large enough to make her fingertips tense with suspicion. At first, Lisa thought it might be a benign mass, or an inflamed node from the cold or trauma. But when she pressed lightly, the lump didn't shift. It felt fixed, oval, smooth, and didn't seem to cause Freya pain, though the mother dog flinched slightly, just a flicker in her body, like recognition, like she knew someone had finally discovered what had always been there. That entire night, Lisa didn't sleep. She sat in the kitchen, dragging out her long-forgotten old laptop. She blew the dust from its keyboard and powered it on. It took minutes to boot, its flickering screen casting a pale glow in the stillness. Lisa began to search, typing slowly, carefully. Chip under dog skin, unreadable vet microchip, canine military chip, hidden tracker, tactical canine implant. The early results were vague, half-truths buried in conspiracy threads and half-abandoned forums. But the deeper she scrolled, the clearer some fragments became. Certain specialized chip devices were developed for tactical canine units, designed to record audio, track GPS, and log behavior, usually embedded beneath muscle, commonly on the left flank, just below the 8th rib. These implants are undetectable with standard veterinary scanners and often deactivated or destroyed upon retirement. Lisa shuddered. Freya wasn't just a stray who stumbled into a snowstorm. She was part of something bigger, more dangerous, and someone had tried to erase her trail. Lisa scrolled further. One paragraph in an archived post caught her breath. A few cases of canines disappearing during missions were officially marked as permanently lost. But unofficial records noted at least 3 dogs returned months later, carrying unaccessed data and showing independent behaviors beyond training protocols. The screen light flickered across Lisa's pale, determined face. She now knew the truth she could no longer ignore. Freya wasn't just a mother. She was a warrior, a living witness. The next morning, with golden winter light casting soft shapes across the wooden floor, Lisa still hadn't told anyone. Not Liam, not Dr. Sarah. She stood by the window, watching Freya seated by the glass, her gaze fixed beyond the snowy garden. She wasn't daydreaming. She was listening, tuned into something distant, something no human could hear, but a survivor trained to respond to the unseen couldn't ignore. Lisa walked slowly toward her, placed a gentle hand on the scarred head, and whispered, as if naming a long-forgotten part of a soul. You were once a soldier, but here, you don't have to be a weapon anymore. You are Freya, a mother, part of this home, loved and allowed to be who you are. Freya turned slightly, her eyes meeting Lisa's. No confusion, no hesitation, just calm, like a lake after a storm. And in that stillness, Lisa understood something words didn't need to explain. Even if the truth about the chip remained hidden, Freya had chosen to stay. Not out of safety, out of trust. She didn't need to be understood, only accepted. As night fell over the quiet, snow-draped neighborhood, the warm light spilling from the small window of Lisa Mitchell's house no longer glowed with loneliness. It glowed with life. Inside sat a woman, once closed off by grief, now resting beside a nest of blankets where 3 small creatures were rediscovering the first warmth of life. But 2 blocks away, inside a charcoal gray sedan parked silently at the frozen curb, a man sat awake, eyes locked on that same window, not out of curiosity. Ethan Rowe, an undercover agent with the Bureau of Animal Defense, was here because of a photograph, posted anonymously on an old K9 handler forum. A blurry image, taken in the dim light of a fireplace, showing a German shepherd curled around 2 puppies. It meant little to most. But to Ethan, It struck like shrapnel through memory, because in it he saw Delta K-29. No one called her that anymore. In the photo, the woman had called her Freya, named after the Norse goddess of life, war, and motherhood. But name changes couldn't hide that gaze. It was the same gaze. A warrior's stare, one who had lived through storms most people couldn't even remember. Ethan leaned back in his seat, eyes still locked on the window. Beside him, a tablet glowed, its screen showing a trace of data he'd followed from the image. Upload location, anonymous account, matching a recent pet supply order. Recipient, Lisa Mitchell. Address, Greenport, Maine. Note, formula, warming pads, waterproof blankets, puppy feeding bowls. All of it lined up. A woman living alone, suddenly caring for a mother dog and 2 pups in midwinter. No prior vet records, and more importantly, no clue that the dog she was sheltering wasn't just any dog. Freya, Delta, wasn't a runaway. She was guarding something. And Ethan knew. If Freya stayed, it wasn't random. It was a link, a trail someone else might already be following. 3 years ago, a fire had ripped through a covert training compound near Bridgeport. Official cause, a propane leak. But Ethan had been there. He'd run through smoke, pulled out a badly burned dog while fire alarms screamed. 5 dogs were declared missing after the incident. One of them, Delta K-29, marked as destroyed beyond recovery. But Ethan never believed it. She was too smart, too fast, too loyal. She wouldn't vanish quietly. He had always felt she was still out there, like a stray radio signal whispering through static. And now, from a single photo, she had reappeared. Her eyes no longer tense, her back no longer coiled like a drawn bow, her breath no longer ragged like a machine trained for command. She was a mother, a guardian, choosing to protect, not by order, but by instinct. Ethan ran his hand across the tablet, pulled up the signal map, where Delta's old chip had once registered, now long silent. If it was still active, someone either wiped it or buried it. But Ethan knew. Some first-generation chips couldn't be disabled unless destroyed by high-frequency bursts. She was alive. And possibly, she still held data someone didn't want released. He opened an encrypted file, typing, Delta K-29, sightings, civilians involved, Lisa Mitchell, risk level, latent. Then he sighed, resting his head against the seat, eyes still trained on the soft-lit house. He wasn't here to interfere. Not yet. He was here to watch. Because if he had found her, so could those who once used, sold, or betrayed her. He added one final line to the mission log. Do not engage unless threat detected. If necessary, I will intervene at all costs. Outside, the snow kept falling, as if nothing had ever broken. But inside the small house where the fire burned low, 3 lives slept. And one woman who had once lost everything was learning how to love again. Ethan knew he couldn't take that away. He could only stand on the outside, guarding silently like a keeper of the boundary between the light and whatever was drawing near from the dark. That afternoon, pale sunlight trickled through a thin layer of mist, falling gently across the cold wooden porch of the little house where Lisa lived, as if the light itself was relearning how to walk after the long freeze of winter. Freya lay quietly beside her 2 pups, eyes half open, watching the world with the calm of someone long accustomed to unpredictability. Her ears, however, remained perked, never missing a movement beyond the foggy window. Lisa sat nearby, running her fingers gently through Freya's freshly dried fur, glancing occasionally at the fire in the hearth, as if trying to stretch this moment of warmth just a little longer, this rare moment of peace that had quietly begun to glow again in her life. A soft knock on the door, barely more than a whisper brushing the curtain, prompted Lisa to rise slowly, no longer startled like someone used to being alone too long. And when she opened the door, she paused for a heartbeat. There stood Mrs. Darlene, the sharp-eyed but deeply compassionate woman who ran the community center where Lisa used to volunteer. Beside her stood a small, slender girl with loosely braided brown hair and eyes the color of still water, clear, gray, and unmoving, like a frozen lake from the inside. The girl didn't speak, didn't lower her head, didn't hide behind an adult like most children would. She simply stood, looking into the house with an expression free of fear, but also without expectation, as though she had already learned the world doesn't give unless you walk toward it yourself. Her name was Ava Green, 9 years old. She hadn't spoken since the accident that took both her parents more than a year ago. No tears, no explanations, just a wall of silence raised between her and the world. A wall no therapy had yet breached. Darlene had only come to check in, gently suggesting Lisa consider teaching afternoon writing classes again at the center. But before she could finish, Ava was no longer at the door. She had stepped inside, not prompted, not stopped, drawn by something in the room that called her in a rhythm only she could hear. Freya lifted her head as Ava approached. She didn't bark, didn't back away, didn't growl like she often did with strangers. She simply turned, moving with the grace of wind over new grass, creating just enough space for the girl to come close without feeling threatened. Ava reached out her hand, not hesitant, not unsure. A small, thin hand, but unwavering, like a quiet declaration that she was tired of holding silence in a world that never paused to listen. And then, as if sensing the fracture in the girl's soul, Freya bowed her head and placed her forehead gently in that tiny palm, a gesture so tender it made the entire room hold its breath. Lisa didn't dare exhale. Darlene covered her mouth with her hand, eyes glinting with something only a mother or someone who has known deep loss could name. Ava sat down on the floor. No invitation, no instruction. She simply did what no one had managed to help her do in over a year. She reached out to another living being with absolute trust. Freya lay down beside her, resting as if they'd known each other forever, as if this moment had long been waiting to surface from some unopened corner of the soul. Ava didn't speak, but she began to communicate, not in words, not in standard signs, but with her hands, tracing soft circles in the air, drawing symbols only she understood. And somehow Freya followed each motion, not with her ears but with her heart. Freya moved closer, laying her head in Ava's lap, allowing the girl to wrap her arms around her neck. And for the first time since losing her parents, Ava raised 2 fingers to her chest and traced the shape of a heart. No one spoke. No one dared to interrupt, because they all understood. A language had been reborn, not through therapy, not through effort, but because Freya saw Ava, not as a case, not as a broken child, but as a kindred soul, quiet, resilient, and needing a place to believe she hadn't been forgotten. When the visit ended, and the 2 of them turned to go, Ava looked back and raised her hand in a silent wave. She didn't smile. She didn't speak, but Freya's ears twitched gently in return. She didn't bark, but Lisa knew. A bond had formed, not through commands or leashes, but through the quietest miracle a dog could give, understanding without explanation. That night, as Lisa closed the door and returned inside, she paused for a long moment, looking at the little family sleeping by the fire, and softly, as if reminding herself, she whispered, "You're more than a warrior. You're a guide, a bridge between broken hearts." From the day Ava first met Freya, she began returning to Lisa's house like clockwork. Not because someone asked her to, but because something inside her had begun to stir. An instinct, an invisible thread pulling her back to the warmth of the fire, to soft fur, and to eyes that understood without needing a reply. At first, she came with Mrs. Darlene, sitting silently by the big window, sketching vague shapes in her weathered notebook. But within days, Ava began entering on her own, no longer hiding behind her grandmother's coat, no longer bowing her head like she feared the world might knock her over. Each time Ava arrived, Freya would greet her first. Not with excitement, but with the slow, sacred calm of a familiar ritual. Yet it was someone else who always reached her first. Scout, the smallest pup. Thin, timid, yet holding something in him that Ava couldn't seem to look away from. On their very first meeting, Scout had left Freya's side and slowly walked to Ava. No barking, no fuss, simply curling up beside her feet, resting his tiny head on her hand where it lay quietly on her knee. No one taught him that, and no one had to tell Ava how to respond. She simply placed her hand on his still thin fur, stroking gently. Not too firm, not too shy, as if both had discovered something familiar, something buried deeper than words. From that day on, they were inseparable. Scout followed Ava everywhere. At the sound of her footsteps, even from another room, he would spring up, searching. And Ava, without ever speaking, always left space in her coat pocket for a small treat or a folded tissue-turned toy. She didn't smile, but her eyes began to shift. Something was opening, small, fragile, but enough for Lisa to notice, like a thin crack in the frost, tiny but signaling that winter was beginning to thaw. One late afternoon, while Lisa was rearranging an old bookshelf, she paused, watching Ava sit cross-legged in the middle of the room, Scout curled up in her lap, both perfectly still. But what made her stop was the notebook open beside them, and the drawing on the page. For the first time since arriving, Ava had drawn a clear image, a soft silhouette of a silver-gray mother dog standing in the snow, 2 small pups by her feet, and behind them, a girl opening a door. In the corner of the page, in shaky, slanted handwriting, Ava had written, "The Snow Goddess." Lisa stood speechless, not just because of the lines, but because of the message. Ava wasn't just drawing a picture, she was expressing a feeling. She was telling a story in her way, saying she had seen something miraculous in Freya's eyes, that she too had begun to return, stroke by stroke, breath by breath, not because someone pushed her, but because something pulled her. From then on, Scout became a living bridge between Ava's silent world and the one outside. When she read, he lay beside her like a blanket, sensing loneliness. When she drew, he stayed still, occasionally nuzzling her wrist like a wordless cheer. And once, when Lisa gently called him away to give Ava some space, the girl shook her head. Not upset, not loud, just quietly placing her hand on his back, asking, "Let him stay. I'm not finished." Over time, Ava no longer shrank into corners. She spread her drawings across the table, Scout in a scarf, Freya at the gate, herself hand in paw with the pup, running through a forest of snow. She never added captions, but Lisa understood. Every brushstroke was a message. Ava, somehow, was living again, piece by piece, in the reflection of a small dog who never left her behind. One early spring evening, while Lisa washed dishes, Ava quietly approached the fireplace where Freya and the pups were sleeping. Scout stirred, hopped onto the armchair, and Ava sat beside him, leaning her head against Freya's shoulder. No one spoke, but the room grew warmer, as if their silence had started to sing a lullaby only the broken-hearted could hear. From across the room, Lisa dried the last glass, and in her chest swelled a feeling not of pity, nor even wonder, but deep gratitude. Gratitude for the little dog who had come not to be rescued, but to rescue. And for Freya, the one who arrived without sound, without demand, but with enough strength to bring a lost child back into the world. As snow began to fall again, quiet, sparse, like the final breaths of a winter reluctant to leave, Lisa stood by the living room window, carefully wrapping a scarf around Scout's neck, her gaze trailing Maple, who was gnawing on an old slipper by the table leg. The house now carried the warmth of real life, not just from the fireplace, but from the tiny paw prints on the floor, the steady rhythm of breathing, and the silences that now felt full instead of empty. It seemed peaceful, until something dark crept past the withered pines, down the snow-blanketed path behind the gate. The doorbell rang. Not loud, but piercing in the hush. A sound that tightened Lisa's chest with instinctive tension. She wiped her hands and walked slowly toward the door. Even before she reached the knob, she felt Freya standing beside her. Not called, not summoned. The mother dog was already there, silent and alert. Her ears were sharp, eyes fixed ahead, as if she had smelled danger long before the sound arrived. Lisa opened the door. A man stood there. Tall, lean but solid, wrapped in a frayed charcoal coat. His hood was pulled low, face speckled with unmelted snowflakes. He didn't smile. He simply held out a crumpled envelope, his voice gravelly, rising from the dust of old smoke. "My name is Martin Kane. I've come to reclaim my property." Lisa frowned. "Excuse me?" The man smirked, holding out the envelope. "That dog. Her name is Delta K-29. I trained her. I owned her. She escaped from our facility. These are the original papers. She's not a pet. She's a programmed tactical canine. She's a missing asset." Each word hit like steel. Clinical, detached. Not a being, a thing. Before Lisa could speak, a low growl rose from beside her, deep, resonant, like wind rumbling through a cave. Freya stepped forward, body between Lisa and the stranger. No longer the quiet mother curled by the fire. No longer the stray seeking shelter. Now she stood tall, muscles taut, hackles raised, amber eyes burning with a ferocity that lit like lightning in a storm. And then she growled again, louder this time, a snarl that made the doorframe shiver and forced a cold, ancestral fear into the air. Martin Kane stepped back half a pace, but he didn't leave. His stare stayed fixed, unwavering. "You don't understand," he said, pulling a worn ID badge from his coat pocket. "This creature doesn't belong to anyone. She's the result of years of training, discipline, command. She can do things you wouldn't believe, and she's not meant to exist outside the program." Freya snarled again, sharper, slicing through the air like a blade. Lisa instinctively placed a hand on her, not to restrain her, but to offer calm. Though inside, her own heart trembled at the words. Property, command, not meant to exist. But what struck her deeper than fear was what she saw in Freya's eyes. For a flicker of a moment, she saw something she hadn't seen before. Old fear, deep, buried, but surging back like a wound torn open. And yet Freya didn't step back. "She's not going anywhere," Lisa said, her voice quiet but firm. "She's not a thing, and you don't have the right to call her by that name anymore." Martin's lips thinned, cold fury flashing behind his eyes. "I'll be back," he said, voice sharp as cracking ice. "And next time I won't come alone." He turned and walked away, leaving behind footprints in the snow like cuts across Lisa's mind. When the door closed, Freya didn't move. She stayed rooted, trembling, not from rage or instinct, but from memory. Lisa knelt beside her, clutching her thick fur, whispering a vow. "No one's taking you. No one can drag you back to the place that left you behind. Here, you are Freya. A mother, a friend, a part of us." And in that moment, Scout lifted his head from Ava's arms, eyes staring toward the window, where the snow still fell. Each flake soft. But outside, peace no longer meant safety. The threat now had a name, and the darkness had begun calling back the one who escaped it with her final breath. When the door shut behind Martin Kane, his figure faded into the gray snow, but his voice lingered. A sound not of someone reclaiming a beloved companion, but of a predator marking a target he once lost. Lisa stood beside Freya, her hand resting on the dog's back, muscles still coiled like drawn wires. And inside her, something smoldered. Not just fear, but anger. For the first time since the accident, Lisa wasn't trembling from helplessness. Now she feared for Freya. But more than that, she was ready to fight for her. A few miles away, in the quiet upstairs room of a dusty old bookstore in Greenport, Ethan Rowe sat in front of a laptop screen bathed in flickering blue code. His face bore the deep lines of a man who hadn't truly slept in years. Beside a cold cup of coffee lay a smudged file folder, its cover reading, Bridgeport Training Facility Fire. Case closed. His fingers moved with precision, typing like a hunter dissecting a trail. At the top of the list of old suspects, Martin Caney, former head trainer, dismissed quietly for internal ethical violations, once in charge of a covert canine program. Ethan had tracked him before, one of the first to question whether the Bridgeport fire was an accident. But no one had listened. 5 dogs listed as dead in the blaze. No bodies, no answers, just files marked as resolved and investigations shut down with unnerving speed. Delta K-29, Freya's designation, was the star of that program. Smart, emotionally attuned, built to protect. But to Caney, she was a tool, a weapon for sale, tens of thousands of dollars for an obedient mind that could feel without ever saying no. Ethan remembered the night of the fire, the building consumed in white-hot flame, the silence that followed. He had traced digital debris and found the last photo ever logged. A blur, but the eyes were clear. Eyes not fleeing from fear, but retreating with the sharp instinct of something knowing the real threat wasn't the fire. It was the humans behind it. Freya had escaped. Somehow she lived, then vanished, until a post appeared on an old canine handler forum, a German shepherd in Greenport, protective, with 2 pups, a curved scar on her left flank. Ethan had known. No confirmation needed. It was Delta. He'd watched from afar. Quietly. Not wanting to scare Lisa. Not ready to step into her life without a reason. But now Caney had come. He had found her. Everything had changed. Ethan picked up his phone and called a number saved long ago. Liam Carter answered after 3 rings. "You saw him, didn't you?" Liam asked, skipping any greeting. "I saw everything," Ethan said. "And he's not here to threaten. He's here to reclaim property. And if he has to, he'll erase everything in his way." "She's not going anywhere," Liam said firmly. Ethan paused, voice low. "I know. But she's not the only target. If Caney knows Lisa's involved, then she's in danger too." Silence on the line. They both understood. This wasn't just a story about a woman and a dog that wandered to her door. This was a manhunt. The return of a ghost that should have stayed buried in the ashes of Bridgeport. Caney was back. And this time he wasn't just coming for the weapon. He was coming to erase the past. But Freya, Delta, was no longer silent. No longer alone. She had a family now. A home. And Ethan knew, if Caney wanted to take her back, he'd have to get through people who weren't standing on the sidelines anymore. Snow had begun to fall again. Quietly, steadily, like the breathing of the city at night. Coating rooftops in white and muffling even the most familiar sounds of everyday life. In the small house at the end of Cedar Hollow, Lisa had just turned off the living room light, checked the doors and windows one last time, and quietly stepped toward the hallway, where Freya and her 2 puppies were nestled on a quilt beside the fireplace. Scout lay with his head resting on his mother's back, while Maple stirred gently, still refusing to let go of the soft tuft of cotton in her mouth. Lisa knelt down and gently stroked Freya's back. The mother dog opened her eyes, blinked slowly at Lisa, then closed them again. The peace of the moment settled deep into Lisa's chest, a rare and precious quiet she never thought she'd feel again. But out there, some hands never sleep, some eyes never close. Just a few hours later, as the clock ticked softly past midnight, a dry crack broke the silence from the back of the house. Not wind, not branches tapping against the awning. It was the sound of metal against wood, the sound of a lock being twisted by an unfamiliar hand. Freya sprang up before the second sound hit. She shot from her spot like a bolt, ears alert, the fur on her neck bristling. A low growl rumbled from her throat, not loud, but sharpened by an instinct honed to survive in darkness. Lisa jolted awake, rushing out of the bedroom. As her fingers reached the lamp, the sound of shattering glass followed. The back door flung open. 2 intruders. One short and stocky, bald-headed, wearing black gloves, wielding what looked like a stun baton. The other, taller, face masked with a dark cloth, gripped a military-grade knife. Their movements were quick, coordinated, not thieves, not amateurs. These were mercenaries, and their target wasn't Lisa. It was Freya. Without hesitation, Freya lunged like a dark arrow, body low to the ground, every muscle driven forward. She slammed into the taller man, knocking him back until his spine hit the dining table. A chair skidded across the floor and crashed. The other man advanced, stun baton flashing. Freya dodged the first strike, but the second hit her shoulder. A snap and a violet flash. She yelped, but didn't stop. She twisted around, leapt, and sank her teeth into the arm holding the weapon. Blood splattered. He screamed, flailing to shake her off, but Freya clamped down like the world depended on that bite. Shouts, crashes, splintering wood. Chaos echoed through the house. Lisa, panicked but not frozen, grabbed her phone. Hands shaking, she called the number Ethan had left 2 days ago. No call had ever mattered more. "Ethan, they're here, 2 of them, backdoor Freya. Lock the bedroom, get on the floor, I'm on my way." The line went dead. Less than 4 minutes later, without sirens, headlights flared on the street. The front door opened with a specialized device. A man stepped in like a shadow forged from night. Ethan Rowe. Black coat, sidearm drawn but safe. Right behind him was Officer Lauren Reyes, short, with tightly tied curly hair and eyes sharp as razors. She held a tactical flashlight in her left hand, a police baton in her right. "One in the kitchen! He's bleeding!" Ethan shouted, stepping over spilled water and a blood trail on the wooden floor. Freya was still fighting, though now worn out. A long gash bled from her side. Maple whimpered softly in the bedroom. Scout curled behind a cabinet, trembling but eyes locked on Freya. The other intruder tried to flee, but Lauren met him at the back door. One clean strike to the wrist sent the knife clattering. She dropped to one knee, pinned him before he could react. Zip ties clicked around his wrists. Heavy breaths echoed in the space. Ethan dragged the other man out of the kitchen, blood smearing beneath his feet. Lisa burst from the bedroom and rushed to Freya. The mother dog was panting, one leg curled from the wound, but her eyes still burned bright, still fixed on the doorway where the danger had come from, as if refusing to stand down until she knew it was over. "You did so good, Freya. So good." Ethan knelt beside Lisa, pulling a field medical kit from his coat. "It's a surface wound. Missed the bone. I've seen her get through worse." "She didn't run!" Lisa choked. "Even injured, she shielded the pups. She shielded me." Ethan nodded solemnly. "Because she's not just a dog. She's a soldier. And this is her family." Outside, snow continued to fall, soft as a breath after war. Inside the wooden house, golden light glowed on Freya's matted, blood-soaked fur, no longer pristine, no longer flawless, but the living proof of something no wound could ever shake: loyalty. As Ethan closed the door behind the backup team, the red and blue flickers from the police cars still flashed against the window panes, like a heart still racing after fear. In the now ransacked house, Lisa sat beside Freya, eyes on the blood-stained fur along the mother dog's ribs, beginning to dry. She dabbed gently with a clean towel, hands trembling though she tried to keep calm. Scout and Maple snuggled close to their mother, looking up at Lisa with wide, dark eyes. Not barking, not whining, just silent, as if they too sensed something deeper was unfolding. Ethan stepped forward, holding a silver-gray steel case. The Federal Animal Defense Unit's encrypted data decoder. He set it on the table, unlocked it using his fingerprint and voice. A soft beep. A screen lit up. Cool, still blue like a lake at night. "Freya, we're going to find out everything," he whispered, kneeling beside her. When the probe touched the small, hard spot beneath her fur, the spot Dr. Sarah had once flagged, Freya tensed, not out of fear, but as a relic reflex from years of having devices forced into her body without consent. But this time, when she felt Lisa's hand on her head, steady, warm, she didn't growl or pull away. She stayed still, as if, for the first time in her life, she chose to because she trusted. Data began to scroll across the screen. Encrypted codes, geographic maps, classified notes, and audio files appeared line by line, like lost diary pages now brought into the light. Ethan's brow furrowed. His fingers flew across the controls, opening folder after folder. Audio files played. Short, cold commands spoken in Martin Kane's voice. Create distraction. Eliminate target. Track. Do not recover. Lisa listened, her heart sinking, not from the words, but from picturing Freya, once Delta K-29, hearing those orders and charging into danger without hesitation, because that's what she was trained to do. And more painful still, because Lisa understood, Freya wasn't a machine. Those memories had embedded deep, etched into flesh and instinct. And to survive, she had to swallow them whole, silently. "This is the full ops dataset," Ethan said, eyes locked on the screen. "Locations of illegal training sites, black market tactical dog transfers, the entire system, from conditioning and behavior programming to final deployment. It's all here. They didn't think Delta would survive, so they didn't wipe the chip. Fatal mistake." He opened a map file. Red dots connected by pale lines. Contact points. Then another file. Photos. One image appeared, grainy. But Lisa knew those eyes. It was Freya, in a concrete room, chained, but staring directly into the lens. Not a look of fear. A controlled soul, still quietly waiting for an exit. "She's not just a witness," Ethan whispered. "She's evidence. The piece they didn't erase. She's a living hard drive." Lisa's hand clenched. Under the blanket, Maple pressed against her arm. Freya, though tired, raised her head to look at the screen. Her gaze, unflinching. No fear, only clarity. A reflex reborn from pain, now redefined by purpose. "They'll come back, won't they?" Lisa asked, her voice strangely calm. Ethan nodded. "They will. Next time it won't just be hired guns. Could be insiders, could be canny, could be worse. And if Freya's what they want to erase?" She paused, steady. "Then we keep her alive. At all costs." It wasn't pity, it was a vow. A decision made by someone who'd lost everything, now ready to rise and protect another soul. Even if that soul came with fur, once growled, once bled on hardwood floors to defend a family she never dared dream of. Ethan looked at Lisa, his eyes for the first time, no longer cold steel, but respectful, like a soldier recognizing a comrade. "We'll release this data when the time's right," he said. "But first we keep her safe. I'm bringing in a dedicated team, and I'm staying." Freya stretched and rested her head on Lisa's lap. No longer Delta K-29, no longer a weapon, no longer a tactical asset. Now she was Freya, a mother, a living witness, a spark of hope for something the world had never known. Justice for those who could not speak, but never stopped roaring from the heart. The last light of the afternoon stretched across the wooden table where the data scanning device still sat, cables connected to a temporary storage unit. Everything frozen in place, as if the storm had just passed. Freya, still healing from her wound, lay dozing near the table leg, her breathing slow and steady like an old clock. Worn, but never stopped. Scout and Maple had dozed off, one resting his head on Lisa's leg, the other curled up in a corner of the rug, buried in a soft cotton towel. When Dr. Sarah Patel arrived, she looked thinner than usual. Her charcoal gray coat couldn't hide the quiet heaviness in her eyes. She nodded as Ethan opened the door, stepped inside without asking much, and placed her medical bag beside her. Her gaze went straight to Freya, as if she already knew this visit was more than just a checkup. Ethan picked up the decoder, his eyes carrying a weight too dense for words. "There's an audio clip. Lisa and I thought you should hear it." Sarah met his eyes and nodded silently. She sat down, removed her gloves, and placed her hands one over the other on the table, as if trying to steady her whole body from trembling. Ethan played the file. A low hum from the recording played first, then a chaotic sequence. Hurried footsteps, sharp breathing, the clatter of metal, and finally, a man's voice. Deep, warm, echoing slightly in a concrete room. "Delta, sit. Good girl. You're okay. I'm here. Everything's going to be all right. I promise, okay? You won't have to keep running. I promise." The final line shattered like a piece of glass falling straight into the room, leaving behind a silence thick enough to choke on. Sarah's head lifted, frozen. Her breath caught, suspended in her chest. "Nathan." It was a whisper, barely a breath. But in that small room, everyone heard it. Ethan looked at her and saw eyes long accustomed to life and death, now glazed with mist. Lisa gently placed a hand on her shoulder, a wordless gesture carrying the weight of 1,000 quiet comforts. Sarah rose and walked slowly to Freya. The mother dog still rested, but stirred as she felt the approaching steps. When Sarah knelt beside her, Freya opened her eyes. No panic, no defense, just a quiet recognition, like something deep within her sensed what was coming. "You remember him?" Sarah said, tears pooling. "You were there when he disappeared. You're the last thing that still holds his voice." Freya didn't move, but in a moment that felt almost sacred, she lowered her head toward Sarah's hand. A slow, intentional gesture of respect. The old woman's hand trembled as she touched Freya's brow, fingers brushing through soft fur, like touching a memory she thought was lost forever. "He used to write home," Sarah murmured, as if talking to herself. "He told me about a dog, unlike any other. Stubborn, but smart. One time he wrote, 'Mom, if I can save even one soul from this place, let it be her, Delta.'" Her voice broke. Lisa sat quietly, her chest tightening. She had never met Nathan, but in Sarah's eyes, he wasn't just a son. He was a promise left unkept, now returned through the eyes of a dog. "She didn't just survive," Lisa said softly. "She remembers. She carries him not in logic, but in her heart." Ethan opened a photo file, a scanned image from leaked internal records. In it, Nathan stood beside Freya, then still Delta, holding her lead, but not rigidly. His other hand rested on her shoulder, like one might rest a hand on a friend. The young man's face radiated something pure. Trust. Not the kind between handler and subject, but person to person. Sarah began to cry, not with sobs, but like the first rain of a long drought, quiet, persistent, unstoppable. Freya lifted her head and pressed her nose gently into Sarah's chest. Not forceful, but enough to unmake the old woman completely. "Thank you," Sarah whispered. "Thank you for surviving, for bringing my son back in a way no one ever expected." The end-of-month moon cast slanted light through the trees outside, laying tremulous shadows across the porch like the trembling fingers of the past. Inside the living room, now warmed by the glow of amber light and the soft breaths of 2 sleeping pups, Lisa leaned back into a chair, one hand resting gently on Freya's back, where fresh medical tape covered her still healing wound. The injury from the last break-in hadn't closed yet, but Freya seemed unfazed by pain. She remained stationed between hallway and door, where light met shadow, like a living shield who had long since chosen her post. Ethan had left less than an hour ago. Said he'd stop by headquarters to process the chip data, then return. Lisa always felt lighter when he was around, but never relaxed. In Freya's eyes, darkness still had form. Silence still had a scent, the smell of danger not yet past. Scout and Maple slept, curled together like puzzle pieces never meant to part. Lisa sat absent-mindedly at the kitchen table, about to rise and make some tea, when Freya leapt up, like wind sweeping across a silent field. No bark, no growl, just one bound from rug to hallway, then a slide toward the back door. Ears up, back arched like a drawn bow. At that exact moment, the back window shattered. The house exploded like glass under pressure. Shards flew across the floor, shattering a nearby water bowl. A large shadow crashed through the gap, followed by heavy footsteps. A gunshot rang out, not hitting anyone but enough to freeze Lisa as if yanked backward. Martin Kane, not a ghost. He was back. In flesh, in breath, in fury. He screamed, gun raised toward the center of the room, squinting through the dim light. "I've come to take back what's mine, and this time nothing's stopping me." But before he could finish, a gray body like smoke launched forward, fast as thunder, clean as a spear. Freya slammed into him with every ounce of strength her battered body had left. The sound of their impact was like bricks smashing. Their bodies spun and crashed onto the rug. He had no time to aim, no time to react. The gun flew from his hand, landing beside the dining table. Freya pinned his chest, jaws near his throat, a growl rumbling from deep in her chest, low and heavy, like thunder under the earth. Caney struggled, kicked hard into her stomach, sending her flying into a table leg. She hit hard but didn't cry out, didn't fall back. She rose instantly, blood dripping from her shoulder, but her eyes still blazing. She stood between Lisa and the pups. Lisa grabbed Scout, shoved Maple behind the chair. She saw the gun. But before she could reach it, Caney grabbed it first, aiming at Freya. Lisa didn't think. She lunged for the walking stick by the door, screamed from deep in her lungs, and smashed it across his wrist. The blow didn't break bone, but it hurt enough. The gun fell again. And in that split second, Freya struck, not to block, but to end it. She bit down on his arm, then twisted, knocking him flat. As he screamed and thrashed, another voice shouted from the door, "Police! Hands in the air!" Ethan and Officer Lauren Reyes burst in, flashlights sweeping, guns drawn in perfect motion. Reyes dropped to her knee, cuffed Caney before he could rise. Ethan rushed to Freya, her right shoulder soaked in red. "Freya, she's—" "Didn't hit the lung," Ethan said quickly. "But it's deep. Needs stitches." Freya panted, legs trembling from blood loss, but her eyes stayed locked on Caney, the man she had stopped again. Not from orders, but from the primal instinct of a mother. Lisa knelt beside her, hand to her forehead, voice shaking. "You protected all of us again." Freya closed her eyes. No whimper, no complaint. She collapsed at Lisa's side, but not in defeat, in quiet certainty that she had done right, that her loved ones were still here. Police dragged Caney out into the flashing red of the patrol lights. He looked back, hatred in his eyes, but said nothing. Reyes walked beside him, cold as carved stone. Ethan stayed, helping Lisa press bandages to Freya's wound. He said nothing, only ran his hand down her spine, speaking silently through touch. "You are the last warrior still standing, and I am proud to call you by name." In the dim golden light filtering through the curtains, the warmth from the fireplace spread through the room like a gentle embrace, holding all who had survived the night. Freya lay curled on the thick rug beside the sofa, her right shoulder carefully bandaged after Dr. Sarah Patel had finished the last stitches. The scent of antiseptic lingered in the air, mingled with damp dog fur and the faint trace of tea left in an old mug on the kitchen table. Lisa sat beside her, hand resting lightly on Freya's neck, feeling each breath, still heavy but steady. Scout and Maple were curled in their blanket, pressed close together, ears twitching now and then, as if still haunted by the chaos of the previous night. Everything felt suspended between dream and memory, quiet but weighty. Then, from the small hallway leading to the front door, came the softest footsteps. No one spoke, yet every head turned, as though the house itself sensed something shifting in its core. Ava appeared. The little girl, in her pale blue robe, held the old sketchbook Lisa had given her months ago. Her hair fell over her shoulders, her eyes wide and unwavering. She didn't rush. She didn't hesitate like she used to. She simply walked toward Freya, the the silent friend who had always understood the things Ava never dared to say. Dr. Sarah stepped back to give her space. Ethan stood by the door, his eyes following Ava closely. Every movement slowed, as if even time was holding its breath. Ava stopped beside Freya. The mother dog was still lying down, her head slightly raised, eyes fogged with pain and exhaustion. But when Ava came near, Freya's ears twitched. Her gaze shifted, from fatigue to focus, from focus to gentleness. No growl, no warning, just silence, deep and knowing. Ava knelt, placing her small hand on Freya's head. Then she spoke. "She's family." No one moved. Lisa's eyes widened. Dr. Sarah dropped the needle and thread. It landed softly on the wooden floor. Ethan raised his eyebrows, exhaling slowly. Officer Reyes, who'd cracked hundreds of cases, noticed her own hands were trembling. Because that voice, fragile, raspy, yet whole, was something none of them had dared to hope for. 3 years had passed since Ava lost her parents in a car crash. Since that day, she hadn't spoken a single word. Every attempt at therapy, every encouragement, every method failed. But now, in front of a wounded dog, a soul that had survived devastation, she spoke. Not to ask, not to explain, but to affirm, to declare what her heart had never stopped believing. "She's family," Ava repeated, firmer this time. Her hand never left Freya's forehead, and though still weak, Freya raised her head slightly and pressed her brow into Ava's palm, the same way she had done the very first time the girl approached her, when the outside world's language could not yet reach Ava's soul, and that bowed head had been the only greeting she understood. The room came alive. Lisa covered her mouth. Her tears didn't fall, but her eyes brimmed with wonder. This was a kind of miracle no one had prepared for. Dr. Sarah turned away, wiping her nose discreetly, then placed a gentle hand on Ava's shoulder. Like a mother who had once lost a child, now holding a child who had just found her voice again. Ethan stepped forward, kneeling beside Ava. He didn't ask why, he didn't push. He simply placed a hand on Freya's back and whispered, "Thank you for seeing her." Ava nodded softly. She didn't need to explain. Between these two beings, one silenced by grief, the other forced into battle, the only thing that remained was trust. Freya closed her eyes, exhaled deeply, and rested her head in Ava's lap. Her wordless thank you. And in that warmth, life returned, not through blood, but through a voice, a simple voice, one that was enough to change everything. As the morning light kissed the frost-covered windows, Lisa Mitchell stood still in the kitchen, slowly turning an old white ceramic mug in her hands. In that kitchen, once filled with silence and space, every breath now had tone, every movement, meaning. On the rug near the fireplace, Freya stretched her body. Her shoulder was still wrapped in fresh bandages, but her eyes no longer dulled with pain. Scout and Maple wrestled over the smallest pillow in their nest, letting out soft whines, the first playful sounds of lives growing day by day. The back door creaked open, letting in a gust of cold air. Liam Carter stepped in, holding a stiff envelope and a small fabric pouch. His face glowed with emotion, his expressive eyes carrying something both relieved and reverent. Behind him came Ethan Rowe, quiet, grounded, but with a softened gaze, like a man who had just fulfilled a silent vow. Lisa placed the mug on the counter, wiped her hands on her apron, and stepped into the living room, where every eye slowly gathered, sensing something significant was about to unfold. Freya raised her head, tongue slipping out slightly in a motion, small but full of life. Though wounded, she remained, like a monument to unwavering resolve. Liam handed Lisa the envelope and nodded. No need for words, only the steady grip on the paper to pass on a bit more strength. Lisa opened it slowly, carefully, not from fear, but reverence. She knew the contents weren't just paperwork. 3 legal documents, signed by the Federal Animal Protection Office, stamped in bold with words she never thought she'd see in her life. Legal owner, Lisa Mitchell, animal. Name Freya Langley, breed German Shepherd. Status recovered, officially adopted. 2 more documents bore the names of Scout and Maple. Inside the fabric pouch were 3 metal tags, gleaming in the sunlight, spilling through the window. Lisa stared at the first tag, Freya Langley from Delta K-29 to family. No longer a number. Now a name. She walked to Freya and knelt to meet her eyes. Freya lifted her head, gaze softened, tail brushing the wooden floor, almost as if she understood everything Lisa was about to say. "Freya," Lisa whispered, her voice deep and warm like rain-soaked earth. "From now on, this is your name. No more codes, no more commands, no more past that wasn't yours. You are Freya Langley, part of this home." She clipped the new collar around Freya's neck, then gently stroked her from neck to shoulder, where the wound still ached. Freya didn't flinch. She closed her eyes and leaned her head into Lisa's knee, as if confirming her place with all the feeling of belonging. Scout bolted forward, stepping on his sister's paw and nearly knocking over the table. Maple barked in pursuit. Ava burst out laughing, the bright, bell-like laugh of spring's first sunbeam. Liam, standing by the window, turned to her, and his whole face lit up. Dr. Sarah Patel stepped quietly to Lisa's side, her hand resting gently on her shoulder. Her gaze fixed on Freya, who was now watching the children play with calm, knowing eyes. Sarah said softly, for all to hear, "I've seen many scars in my life, but never one so beautiful." Ethan bowed his head, eyes lingering on Freya's tag. He had once called her Delta K-29, a lost tactical asset, a living data bank. But now that was no longer what he saw. Now she was a soul with a vast heart. She didn't need to speak. She didn't need to justify anything. She just needed to be called by her true name. And from then on, when the people of Greenport saw Lisa Mitchell walking down the sunlit path, beside a mother dog with dark fur, 2 pups trailing behind, and a little girl with a backpack covered in hearts and stars, they no longer asked, "Are those all your dogs?" They simply said, "What a beautiful family." Because sometimes, to start a new chapter, we don't need to forget every loss. We just need a new name, and someone kind enough to call us by it. The snow had melted into thin streams of water tracing the edges of the wooden porch. In the backyard, Scout and Maple rolled among the dry, leftover leaves of winter, barking as if celebrating some nameless joy. Freya rested her chin on the step, eyes tracking the pups, but her ears remained tuned to every sound from inside, where Lisa was arranging the first pages for her special class. Today was Lisa's first day back at the community center, not as a participant and not as a supervisor, but as a teacher. She was opening Greenport's very first emotional therapy writing class for children carrying invisible scars. The pale blue pickup truck, which Liam had checked over just last week, was ready. Ava sat in the front seat, Maple in her lap, eyes bright as if she were the teacher today. On the back of the seat was her tiny backpack, decorated with scribbles, a red-haired woman, a big dog, 2 little puppies, and a girl raising her hand high. Freya sat in the back, her head poking out the window, sniffing the fresh air of a brand new day. The wind rippled through her thick fur, and for the first time since surviving on instinct alone, she allowed herself to fully relax within the movement of safety. The community center sat at the corner of Magnolia and Maple Lane. Mrs. Darlene Green, the center's director, waited on the front porch, her golden cardigan glowing like sunshine in early spring. When she saw Lisa step out, Freya at her side, and Ava following close with trusting eyes, she said nothing, just smiled, the kind of smile from someone who knows something beautiful is about to begin. The classroom was a small, wooden-floored space. Its windows opened wide toward the garden, where daffodils were just starting to bloom. Lisa laid out paper, colored pencils, and sketchboards. But she knew, this wasn't a skills class. It was a place where children were free to speak, whether through words, drawings, or silence. Ava was the first student. She didn't need an introduction. She sat down, pulled a folded paper from her pocket, and carefully placed it in front of Freya. Her newest drawing, the snow goddess and her family. Beneath it, in shaky but determined handwriting, "Family is where no one gets left behind." Freya lay beside Ava's desk, as if she understood every word. One by one, the others came. A dark-haired boy who kept his hands in his pockets. He hadn't been to school in half a year since his mother's accident. A frail girl who always carried a locked notebook, never speaking. A pair of twins who had lost their father in war, never more than inches apart, as if the world could only be trusted if they stayed together. All of them chose seats near Freya, or Ava, or the window light. Lisa didn't ask them to write. Instead, she told a story. Not a fairy tale, but a true story. About a mother who had once been a soldier, once known only by a code, once wounded and on the run, but who still managed to protect her two young children from a world that had lost its way. And in the end, she was called by her true name. The room went still. Then Ava raised her hand, not to speak but to place a sheet of paper on Lisa's desk. On it she had drawn Freya again. But this time, Lisa stood beside her. Below the drawing, a single sentence. "She is my family, and so are you." Lisa turned away, pretending to adjust the crayons, but really to hide her eyes, now misted with quiet emotion. Freya didn't move much during class, but she would occasionally nudge a child's leg or lick a knee when someone had their head down too long. Scout and Maple lay in the room's corner, where children could take turns petting them. And strangely, no one questioned it. It was as if the presence of the dogs was simply part of healing, like sunlight, like wind, like the steady beat of a heart learning how to feel again. The class ended without a bell, without grades, without homework. Only a promise. Tomorrow, if you want, you can write more, or just come sit next to Freya. That night, as Lisa sat in the living room with a cup of chamomile tea, Ava had already dozed off on the sofa, head resting against Freya's back. Maple lay on her arm. Scout curled against their mother. Lisa looked around and realized the house was no longer a place to run from pain. It had become a place to return to. From now on, writing wasn't just an old job. It was how to live. How to illuminate the small corners inside people with words, with feeling, and with the gentleness of a soul once thought lost. One spring morning, when young leaves were still damp with dew, and the sun not yet strong enough to stir the laziest dogs from their beds, Lisa found a small envelope tucked inside the wooden mailbox by the porch. It bore no stamp, no postmark, only one word in neat, familiar handwriting. Lisa. She opened it under the soft light streaming through the window. The paper was slightly yellowed, scented faintly of wood. Ethan's italic handwriting appeared like the final words of a man choosing to step back from the stage of life. Lisa, I've written and erased this letter no less than 3 times, maybe because I never imagined walking away without leaving an unfinished mission. But today, as I passed Juniper Park, I saw Ava sketching on the stone bench, Scout at her feet, and Freya lying close by, eyes closed, ears still listening to every movement. And I knew, I don't need to stand watch anymore. You opened a door that most of us in uniform never dared to touch, the door to unconditional trust. You didn't interrogate Freya about her past. You asked nothing in return. You placed no demands on her. And because of that, a warrior programmed to obey learned, for the first time, to choose. Freya is no longer Delta K-29, no longer a lost asset. She has chosen her name, her home, her children, and to trust people again. Everything we tried to document in reports, you achieved with nothing but a kind glance and a yard wide enough to breathe. Thank you for opening the door to miracles. I'm stepping back from the role of watcher, not because the mission is over, but because I believe you can do what no record, no briefing, no weapon ever could. Teach a soul once programmed to survive that freedom isn't luxury, it's a birthright. If ever you need someone to walk quietly beside you and just listen, I'll still be there, but no longer to protect, only to relearn how to love, through the eyes of someone who once knew loss. Ethan Rowe. Lisa folded the letter slowly, as if afraid to smudge the still warm ink of memory. She looked up toward the porch. Outside, Ava played hide-and-seek with Maple in the lavender patch, her laughter ringing like wind chimes on a peaceful morning. Scout was trying to climb onto Freya's back, failing, tumbling, but bouncing right back up. And Freya, still lying there, eyes alive with someone who had once died in darkness, now watched the sun rise with quiet ease. Under Lisa's hand, the metal tag etched with Freya Langley glinted in the early light, its lines holding an entire journey. No longer a weapon, no longer a cold file in some report. Now Freya was a mother, a living home, and the beginning of everything being gently reborn. She placed the letter in the top drawer of her writing desk, beside her therapy notebook, and Ava's first drawing, the snow goddess and her family. Lisa didn't feel goodbye, because Ethan hadn't left. He had only stepped back, letting the world know this woman, that dog, and those two children were strong enough now to write their next chapter on their own. The morning after receiving Ethan's letter, Lisa sat in silence by the window where the slanting light brushed across her hand, still faintly scented with old paper. In her heart, one chapter had just closed, the chapter of vigilance and fear, so that a new one could open, a chapter called Nurturing. No one expected the first to plant seeds would be Ava, the girl who hadn't spoken a word for 3 years, who had shut herself away like a door closed quietly against a noisy world. But ever since Freya stepped into the house, ever since Scout nestled into Ava's arms for the very first time, her language had returned, not through her mouth, but through her hands, her eyes, and the colors that gradually sharpened across each sheet of paper. Ava and Scout were nearly inseparable. In the mornings, Scout waited by the door of the community center, as if he knew Ava's class schedule. In the afternoons, they sat together in the corner of Lisa's room, Ava drawing, Scout dozing off, his head resting on her leg like a living pillow. When Scout coughed or sneezed, Ava paused, gently rubbing his back. When Ava fell into silence, lost in a memory too heavy to hold, Scout would lift his head, rest his muzzle on her knee, and breathe deeply, as if to say, "It's okay. I'm right here." From those first drawings, Ava began to build a small world, a place where a brave mother dog named Freya lived, where creatures didn't need words to understand each other, where painful memories could be shaped into gentleness. Lisa watched those pictures grow, not just in number, but in life. In one, Ava used only a single color, blue, the color of cold, but also hope. It showed Freya lying in a snowfield, light glowing softly from her body like a suit of armor made from love. Beneath it, Ava had written, "She's cold, but she's not alone anymore." Another was just for Scout. A close-up of his eyes, round, dark, gazing forward, with the caption, "Small eyes, big heart." Lisa had once been a writing teacher, but she had never seen a kind of wordless literature more powerful than this. Ava's drawings, paired with Scout's silent companionship, began to stir the hearts of everyone at the center. They paused, not to speak, but to listen, to a story told without sound, only life. Then one day, after completing her 26th drawing, Ava whispered to Lisa that she wanted to host a small exhibit. Not for fame, not for awards, just to show others who had lost hope that some broken things can still be pieced into pictures. The exhibit was held on a Saturday afternoon, in the small hall at the community center, where soft yellow lights fell through old glass panes. Ava gave it a name from the heart, the mother dog's brush strokes. Dozens of drawings hung along the hallways on rope lines, each paired with handwritten quotes, like whispers. "Some embraces don't come from human arms. Freedom isn't running away, it's choosing to stay. Family is where you're protected, even when you have nothing left to give." Scout, wearing a bright red neckerchief and wobbling slightly, dashed from guest to guest, occasionally stopping in front of his portrait, as if to explain what couldn't be said. Freya stayed quietly beside Ava, never stepping into the spotlight, only watching. Near the end, Ava brought Lisa a large drawing. It showed Freya curled around Lisa, Scout and Maple nestled close, and Ava behind them with her arms outstretched, as if embracing them all. Below the drawing, a single line that took Lisa's breath. "Family isn't blood. Family is where you stop being afraid." That day, a few people cried. Not from sadness, but because it had been a long time since someone reminded them that healing isn't a miracle. It's small steps, a lick on the hand, a quiet sketch, a pair of eyes that dare to open again. That morning, the snow had stopped, but patches of old frost still clung to the ground. Sunlight crept through the window slats, touching the wooden floor where Freya lay curled protectively around Scout and Maple. All three were still dozing lightly. Maple's nose twitched from time to time. Scout's ears flicked as though dreaming of a faraway field. Lisa stood at the window, one hand holding a cup of tea, the other holding a soft, light brown leash. The only thing in the house meant to hold anyone back, yet never pulled tight. It was the leash she had picked just for Freya, not to restrain, but to remind her. You're no longer being led like a weapon. You're walking as a friend. Liam arrived as he usually did. Quiet steps, bright eyes. He carried a small pouch of peanut butter cookies, Freya's favorite since Ava had introduced her to them. "She has excellent taste," he grinned, offering the bag. "Picks the best pieces every time." As Freya stepped onto the porch, her eyes passed quickly over Liam, then settled on Lisa. A small nod. No command. No tug. And yet the entire pack, including 2 yawning pups, rose, shook themselves, and followed their mother like the beginning of a river's flow. The walk from Lisa's house to Juniper Park wasn't long, but that day it felt wider than ever. Scout ran ahead, tail spinning, stopping now and then to sniff a bush or chase a drifting leaf. Maple stayed close to Freya, occasionally glancing back to check if her mother had paused, and Freya walked steady, head high, not in the hurried pace of survival, but with the grace of someone finally allowed to enjoy each step. Lisa and Liam walked side by side, speaking little, their exchanged glances saying everything, understanding, gratitude, and a quiet affection blooming between 2 people who once believed they'd always walk alone. At the park, light filtered through the bare branches, laying golden streaks on each shoulder like small falling halos. Lisa picked their usual spot beneath the old oak, the one where she and her late husband once promised to bring a child every autumn. That promise had once shattered. But now, as she laid out a wool blanket beneath the tree, placed a water bowl nearby, and watched Freya curl into a gentle pile of fur surrounded by creatures who loved her without condition, Lisa understood. Not all things once lost are gone forever. Some are simply waiting to return in a different form. Ava and Mrs. Darlene arrived shortly after. Ava carried a fresh sketchbook but didn't draw. Instead, she sat beside Scout, rubbed his back gently, and whispered something no one else could hear. Scout lowered his ears, then licked her fingers, his way of saying, "Got it." Liam pulled an old camera from his backpack, cleaned the lens, then sat beside Lisa. "I think we should keep this moment," he said, his voice soft as wind in the trees. Lisa nodded. No posing. No say cheese. Just a click, and the photo became proof of something fragile yet undeniable. Family is made not from plans but from people who choose to stay, day after day, despite everything the past tried to take. Freya shifted closer, resting her body against Lisa's legs. Maple and Scout sprawled across each other, napping beneath the occasional chirp of birds above. Liam said nothing more. He simply handed Lisa a fresh print from the photo he'd just taken. Below it, in brown ink, a single line. "Family doesn't begin with blood. It begins the day we stop leaving." Lisa tucked the photo into her wallet, right beside the ultrasound of the child she never got to hold. And now, Beside that past lay a present that wagged its tail, nestled into her hand each night, and stood between her and the dark, without ever needing to be asked. Night fell softly, like a breath, and the house returned to its usual quiet. No giggles from Scout as Maple stole the toy, no silhouette of Ava leaning against Freya's back, drawing with the intensity of someone who believed the whole world lived in a single strand of the snow goddess she adored. Just the dim desk light, the fading warmth from a teapot, and a laptop glowing on the old oak table. Lisa sat reviewing the files Ethan had left. Data extracted from Freya's chip. Investigation documents about the illegal training and trafficking ring. Nathan's voice, the son of Dr. Sarah, still lingered in the recent audio folder, distorted but breathing, every inhale distinct. Everything was still there, like dust that hadn't yet settled on a memory too fresh to fade. Then, as she checked her email inbox, a strange subject line appeared in the middle of the list. She's not the only one. No sender name, no return address, just a single cold line. Lisa froze. A familiar feeling stirred in her, a vague but undeniable sense, just like that snowy night long ago when she stepped onto the porch without knowing why. Her hand moved slowly toward the trackpad, her index finger trembling as if it already knew that behind this click was something she could never unsee. But she clicked. One image loaded, blurry, tinted blue like from a bad security camera. In it, a dog lay curled on its side, ribs jutting through thin fur, its eyes distant and unreadable. But one thing was unmistakable. A scar, thin and curved, running along the hip. The same scar that had left Sarah silent for a long time the first time she examined Freya. Lisa couldn't breathe. Below the photo, a single sentence. Delta isn't the only one still alive. There are others, waiting to be found. No explanation, no signature, no instructions. Just an old, grainy image and a sentence, like a whisper from a long-buried secret. And it struck Lisa square in the chest, like a hidden hand pulling open a door she had never been ready to face. The door to what remained, waiting. From the corner, Freya lifted her head, as if sensing it. She walked over, not growling, not barking, just silently, resting her head on Lisa's knee like a punctuation mark. In that moment, no words were needed. They both understood. This was no longer just the story of a woman and a lost mother dog. This was truth demanding to be uncovered. This was the call of souls who never got to choose. Lisa zoomed in on the photo. The dog's folded ears made her chest tighten. She remembered the first night Freya arrived. The same expression, the same curled posture, the same silence of a creature too used to being left behind. She opened a new message window, attached the photo, and sent a short note to Ethan. There's another one like Freya. They haven't stopped. Then she saved the image, creating a new folder on her desktop. She named it, Not Yet Found. Freya hadn't moved. Her eyes softened as she watched Lisa's hand tremble. Lisa leaned down, whispered like she had in those early, confusing days. Are you ready to keep going with me? Freya didn't answer. She simply lay down at Lisa's feet, resting her head on her house slippers, ears slightly perked as if waiting for the next sound to move. And in that silence, her answer echoed in the language of those who don't speak. Ready. Lisa sat with Freya by the fireplace, the flickering flames casting ribbons of light on the ceiling like the breath of something sacred. The snow outside had mostly melted, forming streaks on the glass, but still reflected the glow of the fire against Freya's thick coat, making her look silver-dusted, strong and fragile all at once, like the universe itself was leaning in to witness a warrior who had just outlived her past. Scout and Maple lay asleep nearby, a light blanket covering their slowly growing forms. Across the room, Ava's drawings from the exhibition still hung. Her first piece showing Freya standing in falling snow, her eyes sketched with trembling pencil lines, yet full of soul. On the wall, Ethan's letter remained pinned with a single clip, a quiet reminder that sometimes all it takes is one person opening a door for the world to shift. Lisa held a new metal tag in her hand, one that arrived that morning from the Animal Protection Authority. Freya Langley, no longer Delta K-29, no longer a number, a code, or a case file. She is Freya, mother, guardian, and part of a family. And now her name is engraved as a declaration. She was given the right to choose, and she chose to stay. Lisa leaned back, resting her head against Freya's side. The warm fur, the steady breath, the heartbeat beneath that skin. Firm and unwavering, like a knock at a door long ago. But this time, it wasn't asking to be let in. It was inviting Lisa to step out. She remembered that snowy night, the knock that shattered the ice in her heart. The night Freya, then a battered shadow wrapped around two trembling pups, had chosen her porch to stop at. Back then, Lisa thought she was taking in something broken. But now she knew the truth. Freya had come to save her. That door had opened not just to a home, but to a whole new world, where trauma wasn't a weight, but the root of empathy, where silence wasn't a void, but a language that needed time to be heard, where a dog once trained to be a weapon could now sleep peacefully in the arms of warmth, unguarded, unworried. Tomorrow, Lisa knew, she would call Ethan. She would tell him about the photo, about the dog with the scar, about the souls still waiting to be found. She would not let a single one of them be forgotten. Because now, she was no longer just someone who had lost everything. She was someone holding a family together. And because of that, she had a responsibility to keep opening doors for those still standing outside. Freya stretched slightly and rested her head on Lisa's lap. Her amber eyes blinked slowly, long lashes fluttering gently as if brushing against something sacred. No words were needed, no instructions, just a meaningful stillness that said everything. She was never going to leave, and neither was Lisa. A thought rose in Lisa's heart, like a quiet prayer. If I hadn't opened the door that night, would I still know how to love? Freya let out a soft sigh, then curled into herself. A simple moment. But Lisa knew. It was the sign of something much greater. Real love doesn't need to be spoken to exist. It only needs a place to stay. And this house had finally become that place. Freya could now curl up in peace, surrounded by the steady breaths of her little ones. Scout and Maple would grow up not in fear, but in light, within the safety of gentle hands. Ava had begun to redraw the world in her way, not with words, but through brave, trembling lines full of meaning. And Lisa, the woman who once walked through the darkness of loss, could now wake up each morning with a quiet smile, knowing that her heart was beating in rhythm with small, stubborn, utterly faithful lives. Maybe in every person's life, there will come a moment when we hear a soft knock at the door of a soul that's been closed for too long. And if we're brave enough to open it, what steps in might not be perfect, might not be easy to love, but could very well be the one thing that helps us find ourselves again. For Lisa, that scratch at the door on a snowy night didn't just bring a wounded dog. It brought a beginning. For Freya, that house wasn't just a place to hide. It was a chance to live a free life, with no more commands, no more numbers. And for everyone who followed their journey, we now understand. Sometimes, the things we thought were lost forever are only finding their way back. And what about you? If a fragile soul knocked at your heart in the moment you believed you had nothing left to give, would you open the door? If this story touched something in you, please like it. Share it with someone who might need a small light on a stormy day, and subscribe so you won't miss the next story of healing. Because maybe you are a door too, and a miracle is waiting to walk in.